Hey guys, so today I wanted to make a really quick video talking about the Canon 6D Mark II to straighten out a few of the opinions you guys might think I have on this camera. And I'd like to first start off by saying that I love the Canon 6D Mark II. I use it all the time, obviously, for both photo and video, and it does a great job. I don't have many complaints about this camera. Even the video I released last week on this channel, which was a cinematic short film, I shot it entirely on the Canon 6D Mark II. And I was super happy with how that short film turned out. The video quality was amazing, the slow motion was buttery smooth, even though it was shot at 60 frames per second, and the autofocus gave me no issues at all. Also, those Canon colors make it super easy to color grade. And actually, from the looks of it, a lot of you guys like that short film too. Got a lot of great comments on that video, a few likes as well. Turned out pretty good. But if you haven't seen it yet, check it out above in the card. Anyways, I'm not making this video just based off of that short film that I released last week. That wouldn't make any sense because, like I said, you guys love that video. Instead, this one's sort of going off of a video that I made a little over 2 months ago titled, "Don't Buy the Canon 6D Mark II." And I think after watching that video, a lot of you thought that I didn't like the 6D Mark II. But that's just not true. Like I said earlier, I use this camera all the time, and I think I've owned it for about 3 years now. So if I really hated using this camera, I probably would have gotten rid of it by now. But I didn't. I've held on to it for the past 3 years and I've loved using it. At this point, I pretty much know all the strengths and weaknesses of this camera. Now, even though I love using the 6D Mark II, there are a few pros and cons and even what I call neutrals about this camera. And I have an updated list that I'd like to go through real quick. Starting with the pros, number 1 on my list is ergonomics and design. Canon cameras are kind of known for the way they're built and put together. And a lot of people just like the way they feel when they're shooting with them, me included. Number 2 for pros is the build quality. The build quality of the 6D Mark II is a lot like the 5D series. If you've ever used any one of those cameras, you'll know that the build quality is just amazing. They're both built like tanks, basically. Number 3 on the pros list is the Canon color science. A lot of people would probably agree that the Canon color science is one of the best in the business. I'd have to agree with that too because I've used Canon cameras my entire life. That's all I've known, so the Canon color science is definitely up there for me. However, recently I've been using Sony cameras at work and looking at the Sony color science compared to the Canon color science, I definitely like these more. And the final thing on the pros list, number 4, is the flip out LCD screen. Now, a lot of people might not see this as a pro, but it is for Canon cameras because this is the only full frame DSLR Canon camera that has the flip out LCD screen. So that's really the only reason it's a big deal because there's no other options out there for DSLR Canon cameras that have it. Hey guys, just wanted to jump in here real quick, literally and figuratively, to let all of you friendly people know that this video is in fact sponsored. But Jacob, who's gonna sponsor you? You're such a small YouTuber, like, what's going on here? Well, this video is sponsored by yours truly. So that's right, I'm sponsoring myself. If you guys haven't heard yet, I just dropped a new merch line called Capture Great Moments. I'm actually wearing it right now. The designs are sick, the quality is amazing, the color options are endless and awesome, and it stands for something that I honestly believe in and try and live every single day. So if you like what you see and you want to be a part of the Capture Great Moments movement as well, check out the store section below this video or the link in the description. Now, back to the video. Now what do we have for the cons? Number 1 on the cons list is that there's no headphone jack. Now after using the 6D Mark II for around 3 years, I kind of forgot that headphone jacks even exist. Because all I've been doing is just plugging my microphone into the mic jack and then just going from there. But yes, headphone jacks are super important if you want to monitor your audio. So the fact that the 6D Mark II doesn't have one, we're gonna toss that into the cons column. All right, con number 2 is the dynamic range. And I know I've talked about the dynamic range in other videos I've done on the 6D Mark II, and it's just not great. And to give you a little perspective about the dynamic range of the 6D Mark II, right now I'm shooting on the Canon SL2. It's an APS-C camera that costs around $700 when I bought it. And the 6D Mark II, I think I paid around $1,100 for it. And the dynamic range of the SL2 is better than this. So it's hard to argue for the dynamic range on the 6D Mark II when it's worse than cheaper cameras out there. Now for con number 3, the clustered autofocus points. Now on the 6D Mark II, if you're shooting through the viewfinder when taking photos, you have 45 autofocus points to choose from, but all those autofocus points are clustered into the middle of the frame. So it makes it tough to try and compose your subject to the left, right, top, or bottom of your frame. And what I constantly find myself doing when shooting through the viewfinder is using the focus and recompose method. That's when you focus using one autofocus point and then recomposing your camera and then taking the photo. Now con number 4, and this kind of goes off of the clustered autofocus points, and it's that there's no joystick on the back of the camera. If you've ever seen any of the 5D cameras or even some of the newer mirrorless cameras made by Canon, they have a joystick on the back of the camera used to select autofocus points or maneuver around menu systems much more intuitively and easier than using the dial here or the scroll wheel there or here. Overall, it just makes life easier when you're shooting. It speeds up a lot of things, especially when it comes to selecting autofocus points. So that's all for pros and cons. Now let's talk about what I'm calling neutrals. Now these are going to be things that don't really fall into the pros or cons categories. They're more so features that people have a subjective point of view on. And number 1 is going to be the 6.5 frames per second in photo mode. Some people might argue that 6.5 frames per second is too slow. Other people might say that 6.5 frames per second is perfectly fine. But in my opinion, it all depends on who is handling the camera. For example, if you give the 6D Mark II to somebody who's never used a pro style camera like this before, then they might want something maybe a little bit faster. Maybe 6.5 frames per second is too slow for them. However, on the other hand, if you gave the 6D Mark II to a more experienced photographer, they might not even need the 6.5 frames per second. They might be able to nail it in just one frame. Neutral number 2 is that there's no 4K video resolution. Again, it all depends on who you ask. I know when the 6D Mark II was released, a lot of people didn't like that it didn't have 4K. However, in my opinion, I think 1920 by 1080 is perfectly fine. Now, would I like to have 4K on this camera? Absolutely. But am I completely devastated that it doesn't have it? Not at all. Neutral number 3, there's no in-body image stabilization. Now before I talk about this one, I know the 6D Mark II has digital in-body image stabilization. However, that's not what I'm talking about. Digital image stabilization is going to crop in on your camera's sensor, but regular old in-body image stabilization won't do that. And that's the image stabilization I'm talking about. I don't want digital image stabilization because of that crop. I want to use the entire camera's sensor. But even though the 6D Mark II doesn't have in-body image stabilization, I can live without it because all of my lenses, they have image stabilization. But it's pretty obvious why the no IBIS issue, that falls into a neutral gray area. Neutral number 4, it can only shoot in 60 frames per second for video. Now this is something that's not a big deal to me. Obviously, I'd like to have a higher frame rate option, something like 120 frames per second. But 60 frames per second, that's perfectly fine. I can get by with that. But some people might need that 120 frames per second, and if that's the case, then I wouldn't recommend the 6D Mark II. Now for neutral number 5, there's only one card slot. This is more of an issue for wedding photographers and videographers, but for somebody like me, I don't really need it. I think I might have said that this was a con in some of my previous videos about the 6D Mark II, but it all depends on who you ask. Now for neutral number 6, that's going to be the 26 megapixel image sensor. This is another thing I've heard a lot of mixed opinions about, but if you're asking me, I've never had an issue with the image sensor. Unless you plan on blowing your photos up to billboard size or you crop in on a lot of your photos, then you shouldn't have anything to worry about. But if you do those two things a lot, then you might want to look into a higher megapixel camera. Something like 30 or 40 megapixels will probably be better. Now for the final neutral on the list, the ISO range. The ISO range on the 6D Mark II goes from 100 up to 40,000 and is expandable up to 102,400. For me, I don't have an issue with it. I've never been in a situation where I've wanted more of an ISO range, so expandable up to 102,400. I've never even gone up to that. I've never even gone up to 40,000. But some people might think that this ISO range isn't good enough. And if they think so, then they can toss that into their cons column. But personally, I would toss this into my pros column. So that's my pros, cons, and neutrals list, and jumping back to the video I made about why you shouldn't buy the 6D Mark II, I just want to say I didn't make that video because I hate the 6D Mark II. Instead, I made it because there's people out there right now that are considering buying this camera, and they might not realize that there's other options out there that could potentially be cheaper and have the same specs and features that they're looking for in a camera. For example, the 6D Mark II is very similar to one of Canon's newer cameras, the Canon RP. And the Canon RP is slightly cheaper than the 6D Mark II. So if I can get the word out there that there's cameras on the market right now that are newer than the 6D Mark II, have a lot of the same features as the 6D Mark II, and are cheaper than the 6D Mark II to help the consumers save a little bit of money, then I'm gonna do it. All right, that's the end of my rant. Hopefully that straightens a few things out about my opinions on the Canon 6D Mark II. So thanks for coming to my TED Talk. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos just like this one, subscribe to the channel by clicking right here. Also, thank you for watching, and always remember to capture great moments. Peace.